Read the last chat comment.
Does your system tell you where these different people come from?
Well, we were just looking at them. Some of them are just saying where they are.
Oh,
So this one here is born in Ashland, Ohio, but she's in Vancouver.
who's that?
Christine Medbeck.
What about Gladys Brubacher?
Did Gladys say? Gladys, can you hear us? Tell us where you're from.
We're going to get started with our last presentation of the afternoon. Before we do that, I'll remind everyone that all the content, again, all the content from today, or actually last evening and today, is being recorded online, and that will be made available on our website within a relatively soon.
Probably within a week. Yeah.
But within the next week. As well, we want to get the content of speakers on our website as well. So be sure to check back on the website this week, and we'll get that up for you as soon as possible. Also, I wanted to let you know that to our online cousins, we want to welcome you back. And just looking at the screen up here, seeing some of the chats in the chat box. There's some folks on board here that are from quite a distance away. North Carolina, I see up there, and Vancouver. So yeah, we're happy to have you joining us. And
Georgia.
welcome to the Brubacher reunion. It's at this time, it's my pleasure to kick off our final session of the afternoon. Dr. Kenneth and Marty Brubacher will be sharing their knowledge on the original settlement of Brubakers in Lancaster County. If you are joining us online, you can enter any questions that you may have for this presentation or the presentation from Dale Brubaker earlier today. We're going to have time probably after this next presentation to have an extended question and answer session. So if you're online, go ahead and think about the questions you might have. Put them down in the chat box, and we'll accumulate those so that when Dr. Ken and Marty are finished with their presentation, we can bring some of those up and get them together. Dr. Kenneth Brubaker is a well-known geriatrician, educator, and clinician. Over the years, he has received numerous awards and recognition in geriatric work and education in the community of Pennsylvania and in the USA. He also volunteers on the PA Attorney General's Advisory Board for Elder Abuse and has served as the chief medical director, Pennsylvania Department of Aging and Pennsylvania Office of Long-Term Living many years. Dr. Ken and his wife Pamela have been married for 55 years. They have 3 children and 11 grandchildren. Martin Brubaker was originally from Johnstown, PA, and with seven generations of family roots, C and N Brubaker family lines in Somerset County, PA. Marty is a graduate of Gettysburg College, 1968, with a degree in history, Phi Alpha Theta History Honorary Society Honors Seminar. He first worked in New York City as an urban planner, both private and municipal. His major professional career was in Montgomery County, Maryland, where he retired from his career moving from community planner to management and budget official. Currently located in Hagerstown, Maryland, he served on the City Council 2006 to 16 and the City Planning Commission. Maryland Municipal League, Legislative Committee 2013 to 2016. He also is on the Habitat for Humanity Board of Directors, a member of the Washington County, Maryland Historical Trust, and is on the Board of Directors of the Brubacher Families of America 2013 president. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Ken and Marty Brubacher.
Good evening, everybody. One of the things with tag team here is we can decide who's going to go first, who's going to go second. When we have something to say, and we don't have a chance to say, what are we going to do about it? So I think your patience on this. By the way, I just want to tell you, I have 2 days to. I can just touch the agro business here. I put the dairy farm, my bubble running. You can retire from that. But I visited the press in the production of the farms up here. I had the false impression that one of the more further north you go from Lancaster County, the more difficult it is to grow crops. And I found out that's true. It's certainly true here in this province. So thanks a lot for the opportunity for throughout this area. Thanks for the knowledge that I've gained. One of the challenges of speaking this time of day is trying to keep everybody awake. I hope everybody talking. So I can't keep it away from Steve. Well, I can tell you a couple of things. One thing is, Marty and I have exact DNA. We're one of the person, Terry Brubaker thing, that we're almost perfectly balanced. We are, there's some issues here. Marty's taller than I am, he's better looking than I am, he has more hair than I am. But other than that, I think we're a lot the same. But just to share with you, when we look at DNA, it doesn't matter where the DNA comes from in the human race. It's 99.9% the same. Isn't that a shame how we fight each other, don't treat each other meanly because of a different culture, or different socioeconomic background? Why not maybe 99.9999? There's a little bit difference, but anyhow, that's what we like to know that we are all children of God. So we appreciate that. So one of the other benefits I have in speaking now is that Dale already mentioned a lot of things I'm going to say. So I'm going to try and clean up my script a bit here and not say as much as I was planning to. But there's so much stuff we can talk about. And I think when we talk about the region of Pennsylvania, and I know it's Lancaster County, but really it was way in Lancaster. One has to have a good sense of the history in terms of why our cousins 12, 15 generations ago had interest in coming here. And Dale mentioned several times, some others I jotted down too. So for example, well, let me just go back a little bit. I know there's information Dale gave scattered throughout these lectures, and they were actually super. I just really appreciate Dale's work. But just remind you, he talked about that several times in the 30 years war that occurred in Europe. Back in 1618 to 1648, the 30 years war. What I didn't know is that there were between 4.5 to 9 million peasants killed during that war. And that set the stage for exactly having farmers or serfs, whatever we call them, to kill the land throughout Europe. So his name is Ludwig, was like a governor of the Platte area. And so he was interested in getting somebody that was prepared his life. He had no one around. So that history makes it very interesting as to how the Brubakers had a chance to migrate to that area. He already mentioned Dale, mentioned that first Peter was escaping in the prison in Missouri. He went to Lancaster, Maine. I've been there and also been in the top area, and I'm not quite sure what was different about them. I'm thinking my own mind. One of the things that's unique about this is that you could own land there. And in fact, a number of Amish actually migrated to that area as well. And we're not sure why, but they didn't migrate from there to Platte area. So they wasn't happy with that they could migrate. Whereas when Peter or when our line went to process or went to Platte area, he could not. And so he had to rent it. And he also could not be a citizen. Gail talked about the limited crowd, the group of people get together. Well, one of the other limitations was that this is not all areas of the flood area, but some areas we know that families were told they could not worship in their house together. And so they were told in a small community near a river that they have to go out in the woodland and worship. And the only exception they would have would be if they had inclement weather. So snow and other kind of things would keep people out of the worship in their homes. So there were a lot of restrictions like that. And also they couldn't proselytize. They couldn't share their gospel, share their done on the list. So there's a lot of things that seem like to build up bigger as far as motivating our cousins to think about there's going to be some place to go. Because think about it. They migrated from Switzerland because of persecution, as well as being treated unfairly, being in prison, and thinking that they're going to have religious freedom, which Carl literally promised. He didn't produce. I guess they were doing such a good job, doing real well. He started putting restrictions on it. Dale mentioned they didn't hear that quite as well as I would like to. But apparently, he had restrictions on in terms of they had head tax, and they didn't know land, so it couldn't be taxed. So you can see and understand why our cousins many years ago felt there's got to be some better place to go. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to share just a little comments about William Penn. To be, I don't know how much you know about the William Penn relationship with the Swiss Germans and the planet area, but it's to be honest, a common thing. And I'm just going to go over the detail. So William Penn was the son of Admiral William Penn. And much about Admiral William Penn, other than the fact that he was involved in governance in Great Britain during his era, and he was an admiral of a navy for the British. And during the probably around 1650s, the 1660s, mid-60s at least, there were the Dutch and the Great Britain were duking down, so to speak, on the navy. And the Dutch seemed to have more control over that and be winning more victories in what the Great Britain Navy was doing. But it just so happened that Admiral William was on a ship that was in battle with the Dutch. And they were very successful in defeating the Dutch. A number of ships actually sank, and then they ended up going back to the world. The repairs didn't function anymore. So William Penn really, because in the eyes of Charles II, but we had achieved a very important part of their history in terms of being able to control the seas in and around those countries. Now, the King Charles II was absolutely elated over this. And not only was he elated with the victory that Admiral William Penn had performed, so it was that his brother was on with Admiral William Penn's ship, and he survived without any injuries. So the king didn't want to do besides offer some land in North America. So he offered Admiral William Penn 29 million acres of ground. It's a ton of acres, just south of the colony in New York. Admiral Penn turned it down. There's no among historians, there's some questions to why he turned it down. Some think that he would have rather had land given to him to Ireland than to go to North America. That's possible. That makes some sense. Where my position at, I happen to know that William Penn died several years after their event, and then made it very well then that he was having some health issues. And those days, by the way, he was 49. The life expectancy during that period of time around the world was about 45. And when pandemics occurred, plague and others, the life expectancy was often in the 20s, 25 to 20. So again, we got to keep that in mind. That may in place for the old people that I've not seen the benefit of. I'm not sure. So a little bit of comments about my son, William Penn. I think in the eyes of Admiral Penn, he probably was disappointed with his son, William Penn. But William Penn, his son, was a young 17-year-old going to the University of Oxford. A brilliant young man, very articulate, great communicator. Unfortunately, he was too much for the university. He was very open and outspoken about the fact that the Church of England has it wrong in many areas. He was a student in theology, has 2 students, one And he's pretty, this thing outspoken about, and we know he left the university, we don't know whether he was expelled, he voluntarily left. It was not a good thing. Now, about that time, he was also engaging with, George Fox. Sure, you know about George Fox, he's the father of the Quakers in the movement. Well, he was, I guess, educated, and many things to do with his relationship with George Fox. So during the next few years, George Fox asked William Penn to go with him, travel Europe, and get to know some of the greater communities that are around Europe. And so that happened, and it's providential that William Penn with George Fox happened to be in Anabaptist from the plot. So he really connected with them because the theologically were a lot the same. They both felt they were opposed to baptism. They were vehemently opposed to the idea of the church being married to the state. Separation was so important. They both refused to, that they mentioned, to carry the sword against the enemy. They were opposed to that because they read the New Testament to the chapter, the Sermon on the Mount. So there were things like this that they had in common. William Penn was also impressed with the quality of work that he was performing when they were performing in the Latin area. That's no surprise, because actually to this day, some of the best artists are the Swiss Germans, which really have a careful land, how productive the land is. So, and that was one of the other things that connected William with the Swiss Germans in the Latin area. So, moving forward, then, when after William Penn went back to and George Fox was back, they gave William Penn another assignment. They said, this time you can go without George Fox. We need to have him go to North America because there are some issues among the Quaker communities. It's not clear in my mind when I read the history of that, whether it was issues with Quakers overbound and Protestants, or whether it was issues more with the Native American Indians. I think it's the latter, because we didn't treat them very well as we understanding the first around the era of the states on how Kenneth and states I was really good working with while I learned it in my house that there is some reconciliation taking place for that. So keeping that in mind, William Penn, now that's back in about 1670. So within the next 10 years, William Penn, the student out there, stepped up and played that his father got off of this land. He said, I would like to have that land, 29 million acres, because in his vision, he was hoping that he could establish a colony in North America where there's a true separation of the state from the church. And also that you can also be opposed to bearing arms. So he thought that was a really important opportunity. So he did sign things off with King Charles II. The rights to own the land, and then he proceeded to advertise the land throughout Europe. And of course, my own mind, I'm sure they take rocket science to figure out who he was thinking about. Our Swiss cousins heard about that very quickly, and of course, before you know it, this is around 1681 is when he signed the agreement with the king. And then shortly thereafter, they started getting information out, and that's where course, a recent flood area. Now we know negatives that were occurring with our cousins in the flood area. They would be hiding related to the street. So that is a background, at least give you an idea of kind of things that played out before they got to the Pennsylvania area. So when they got there, we'll let my cousin here talk about that movie. We'll be up here at this point.
Yes, thanks, Ken. And I wanted to mention a few things about the background. And first of all, Ken did mention we have both been traveled these lands that we saw in Dale Brubaker's things. We did it together in 2016. My wife and I have been there and done some research and kind of around geographically in 2014. And then Ken went again in 18, I believe, on a bus trip. So we have been to those lands, and it really gives you a feel for what's going on, and also the people you meet. It's just fantastic. they treat people well over there, they treat people well, in our experience. And, I wanted to mention one or two things. I wanted to thank Dale. He mentioned that I had done, he had followed up on some work I had done, some presentations I had made on our trips over there. But he certainly added a lot of flesh to the skeleton I have life. He's done a lot of research, a lot of good graphics. I'm getting too old to do those graphics, you know. But so I want to thank him for that. And I wanted to add one or two things that I think add a little bit more color. Everybody likes to hear about Brubaker's personally. So you might realize he's used that word kid deal, he pronounced it a little bit different. Kid deal, I think he said, but it's kid deal. You won't see that on a map. So when we went over there, he said, okay, we'll just look up kid deal and it's fine. It's a medieval term, so you won't see it on a map. It's above Roosevelt, I knew that. So we stopped in, the town was driving in Roosevelt. We went into the post office and said, you know what? Actually, they might know. Sure enough, the postal clerk said, well, it's not my postal district, but I've heard of that place. I think there's a restaurant there. Sure enough, he gave me the coordinates and we twisted up the hillside above the lake. And we found it, and he had pictures of a housing development with him and Brubacher and Brubacher-Brubaker and so forth. That's the first time we saw it. I knew we were in place. The Swiss authorities would not let a sign like that. That was the home of Brubaker. So it's really encouraging. When we saw that modern development, they had Brubaker all over. And that was the Swiss people helping us out. Ken and his wife, Pam, myself and my wife, Pam, had lunch dinner at the restaurant there, which was the old Waterman, which goes back to medieval times. When they heard our names and why we were there exploring home territory, they brought out a book, it was all in German. They went into a place where a supervisor of that water wheel had been a Brubaker in the 1500s. So it's really neat to see that. Just more evidence that that was our area. And that's right over when we've always called the bridge over the stream, but it might be Dale might have a better idea, but they're all close together. So, there's a lot of similarities, and interested to see more. But I recognize a lot of the shots did there that other areas, so really interested to check into that. And one more thing about the other side of the lake, before we get to Pennsylvania. I know you're all waiting to see Pennsylvania. On the other side of the lake where they went, and there was a lot less Anabaptist persecution. About 1650s when they went over there, as I understand it. And there's still a lot of Brubaker mementos over on that side. That's where Peter Brubacher had his estate and all that. But there's a village of Brubaker. Little village, I'd say 25 or 30 houses on the top of one of those beautiful green hills. You can see Lake Zurich in the distance. Vodensville, which is where we first came over, is down below the right. It's just fantastic. And they've got multicolored. You might think it's a little strange, but the multicolored things in this little village is a little different. You never drive against the on the lane, And the lane is called Brubaker Road. Brubaker's philosophy. And it runs down the hill, so it's kind of cool. And then as you come out and you get more towards the area where our ancestors departed Europe from, when you get to the Yucatan, where our German guest, where he grew up nearby, one thing I wanted to add was the fertility of the land. Emphasize that is something that just follows us, follows the Mennonites everywhere. We were at Eberstein in 2014, and we saw the Mennonites. We were hunting for any evidence. We knew about Eberstein, we would have been there. And there in the back of the village, the Mennonite churches are never on the main street, always in the back, out of the way of the main congregations. And there was a Mennonite. So again, we knew that we were in a familiar place. We just stumbled on it. And then you can see way in the distance, giant huge ship going down the Rhine. And in between was these very prosperous fields. So the Mennonite side was general produce, very productive. I took the rental car and drove to find they could and all that. Very fascinating. And just that's a common thread. Productive land. There were vineyards up in the foothills not far away. But in any communities I was in, it looked like the Mennonites were pretty much general farmers rather than vineyards. A lot of vineyards there everywhere. So with that, Ken laid very well, and so did Dale and other speakers about why they needed to get out. It was just, they were serving at the mercy of the leaders of the government. They could get kicked out at any time. So William Penn had proselytized not only the people, but he also proselytized. He had enough, he was high enough in England and well enough recognized that he could at least get audience with the leaders of these various German principalities. And in the Palatinate, you got a pretty good welcome, at least in the 1670s, as Ken mentioned. And that started to lay the groundwork. He wrote letters saying, well, if I had, this was before we had Pennsylvania, if I had a colony, would you allow people to emigrate? So many words. He just did so much laying groundwork. On the other hand, he almost got literally picked up and thrown out some places because of the religious issue. So, at any rate, I have here a letter signed in 1709, a petition. No, it's actually a letter to the Dutch Mennonites from Iversheim. It's signed by Hans Brubacher. So he was important enough. Iversheim, another village, was having trouble with one of their mountain people who the Dutch had financed. And they went to Iversheim and said, these people are fixing the problem. You don't have to worry about it up the other end of the Rhine, the Netherlands. And Hans Brubacher was one of the signers of we battled for this other village. So that's kind of neat, but it shows it was the Hans Brubacher in Iversheim, and the ones that came over were my record in the piece of grandchildren of Peter Brubacher, the one that escaped from the prison in Zurich. There's stories about that too. Remember that one. So at any rate, we don't know. We know that two of them were brothers. We definitely know that this Steve's in Pennsylvania 45 years later. And the other one might have been a cousin. So can we
Yep.
do the
We're ready to show the slide. And if we could bring the lights down, yeah.
well, I like good here.
I know. What I can do is fill it in. I can blow it up. Where do you want to point now?
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
Can you hit the larger track again?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So you don't know whether they arranged this land in Europe or in Asia. Penn mostly had his agents. I got it. Okay, we'll help with that. That Penn mostly had his agents do the work. Connecting, along to the communities along the Rhine, was listening people for Pennsylvania. But we don't know whether they arranged it in Europe after they got here. There's some stories that say the first Germans to come that went to Lancaster were in 1710 or 1709, 1710 in that time frame. And then he was with that, although he's not, they didn't do ship registrations at that time. So there is a list of the ones that stayed behind and settled in Lancaster, the first settlement. But there's also stories one of those original three, you can see, may have come in 1710, sort of scouted the territory, made arrangements and all that sort of thing, and then went back. We don't know. But in any event, they came over in 1717 and they had arrangements to get land right here, shared with Christian Hershey in one patent, one deed at 1,000 acres. Then they had a private arrangement between Hershey and Hans Brubacher. That's now the A line in the Brubacher genealogy. Then another 700 acres up here was another Hans Brubacher, who shared it with his brother, and he knows his brother, Jacob Brubacher. And again, I haven't seen evidence, but it said they were cousins of it. They obviously knew each other. The patents were all like within the same day. They got their patents. People that had land around it, the patents were delayed for another 15 years. So they must have had some pretty strong. So this 1,000 acres, 500 for Christian Hershey. That's the ancestors of the Hershey Candy Company. This is the 500 acres was Brubacher, Hans Brubacher. This
Let's go move around a little bit here. Where are you now?
500 acres up here was divided. This 700 acres up here was divided between Hans, another Hans, and Jacob, who they think was his younger brother. And Hans had the better end of the deal here, and he shared it with another person, Peter Spar, up here. He shared it with another person, 478 acres, 222 acres. But this is probably a good time to show what very quickly happened. B and A quickly expands to the west. So A right here, hot tracks here, and I'm not going to read them off, but they were all in the 100, all large substantial tracts. 125 acres here, 185 acres here, and they were actually using these plots before. This is when they actually were legally recorded. They couldn't even legally record things until like 1728. And then the B track, the person that had the smallest original, and 105 acres here, 25 acres here, and then another big piece up there. Another 90 acres up there. So they were moving fast. Now, we go down to A again. A was a real go-getter. He was already buying land 12 miles north of Brubacher, what's now called Brubacher Valley, because A was smart enough to know that land is a big thing. So he was buying land up there. It's important to realize this was the frontier. Lancaster was not a county here. There was no Lancaster city. It was wilderness. And they, like the stories here, that people came and built cabins, cleared the trees, and got it ready. That's what had to happen here. You can imagine the amount of work that had to go on in order to make these tracks productive. So Hans, as I said, was a real go-getter. He was buying land up in 12 miles to the north, Brubacher Valley. It's known as that to this day. And he was also a little bit outside of what I think at least more conservative than the Mennonites approve of. He was constable. He was on the road commission. The first road, the Susquehanna River, which is about 15 miles to the west. He was even on some arbitration mediation board, which would be more of a in light of the Mennonite beliefs, I understand it. but he was a real go-getter in any move. And, you know, this is probably a good time to say, he was probably a pretty good converter too. His oldest son, wanted to take a wife from Europe. We won't let him go. We won't let her go over. When A1 died, the son, within a very short time, was over in Europe, 1748, 49, and the D line Abraham came back, as mentioned in other presentations. They came back together, they were on that ship registration. So that's the D line. So that's where the A line was. Today, the A line goes, now, people don't know, I would imagine, most of you told me you've been in Lancaster. This is the,
Where are we?
to the right, it's really the edge, close to the edge of the city of Lancaster, Franklin and Marshall College. The home of President James Buchanan. He actually was born and raised in a couple counties to the west, but settled in Lancaster. And here you can see that on the Brubacher site, bring it out a little larger again. You can see Brubacher Run, that's all of that today. If you go down this road here, it identifies the stream as Brubacher Run. There was a mill right here, we're right working at the, no, it's down here. Columbia Pipe went across. Guess what? Little Conestoga Creek. Little Conestoga Creek is the boundary between B and C. Up there, it runs right through the middle of the Hershey track and the Brubacher track. So I would imagine that name is imported from people familiar with this area. Let's see, with B, we know a little bit less about personal activities. And then through the years, as you can imagine, there have been many transactions, many family changes. This is not what I wanted to show was the basic layout of the original tracks from the Penn family and then the immediate additions that made up basically the outline of A and B tracks lasted until the late 20th century. C over here, and I didn't talk about C. The C went to western Pennsylvania in the 1780s. There's two Brubakers show up in Bedford County, but it's now Somerset. It's been split right after that into Somerset County. They went to the area that's now Somerset County in the 1780s. They show up in the 1790 census. And there were no Brubaker, there was nobody from the C family with the surname Brubaker left in Lancaster by 1808. They were gone, sold off. It's like, well, that would have been Marty. You know how much they paid, by the way? 50 cents an acre. 50 cents an acre. Pretty good deal. If you think about it, they had brought money. Sideline, Peter Brubaker, one that had been in prison in Zurich and Glasgow, his estate, I calculated, in modern money, because there's a lot of correspondence about it, because the children tried to recover money from the Swiss government, bad chance. They didn't get it. But it was 9,000 to 10,000 guilders worth $1 million plus or minus $200,000 a day. You know, about 2 or 3 times as much as most of the other estates were confiscated at the time. So the Brubakers had a nice setting, but somehow they had enough money to come over and establish these land grants. So, I don't know whether I'm going to, go much beyond it except to say, this is now the suburban Lancaster is obvious from the picture. There's a very large medical center up here.
You can back it up. Yep. Oops.
Up here at the top of the left-hand side of the picture, Franklin and Marshall College over here. Oh, I know what I was going to add in, because I know all the Lancaster Brubakers are scratching their heads with us. Okay. Give me the whole time if you can.
Yep.
There we go. All right. Now. There we go. Now, most people understand this is the Hershey tract. And in modern terms, everybody thinks of this as the age, part of the age group. So why, how could that be? I mean, when this was sold as part of the age tract, what happened? Well, in the 1760s, right after all these expansions, Hershey and Brubacher did a swap. There's 74.5 acres in this general area right here. Were added to the Brubacher tract. And 74 acres over here, we don't know the reason. We're added to the Hershey tract. The Hershey's had this, now the Brubacher's had that, and that's, you can stop scratching your heads. That's why we think of what we've always thought of the A tract was the A tract. It's not original a long time ago. I know Canadians care about that also. It also, this tract over here, it's not precisely competing with here. So that made it nice. That's probably one of the reasons. Granted that off and then that's piece there, move their machines. The Rorstown Mennonite Church was sometimes called the Brubacher Church. There's some graves around that. There's another grave farther up at Rorstown here. Community unincorporated, you can't find it on a list of towns, unincorporated. It's now being blended into suburban thing. And if you go up a little bit further, there's a Mennonite seminary right here. The meeting house down there that I just showed you had formerly been there and originally been down on the acre. Down at the bottom. Back. This has a lot of, and we help maintain this day. There's another Brubacher cemetery over here. This is more associated with B tract. And this road here is well known in Brubacher. Brubakers have lived along here. The last homestead would be right here. It's beautiful. It's been, you know, I think it's better than when I first started coming up to Lancaster. And they're doing a good job. Excuse me. And then let's go, keep going up a little bit. Keep going to the south. I'm sorry. Keep going to the south. I'm sorry. Down here is the last A homestead, which is water complex and nicely built home. These are 19th century homes. They're not the original. The original homestead, we're not quite sure where it was. It's probably below Brubacher Run. Probably was below Brubacher Run here down in here somewhere. There's still housing, maybe looked over a cemetery. So this is the last homestead. It's still there. It's part of, this is a large senior housing complex with the church. Apostolic. Well, a church bought it in the 1980s, I believe. And we built a very nice complex here, and we have our annual reunion right here in this building, right here. Very nice building, an adjunct to this complex. And then down again, down in the original home has been saved, and they use all the buildings. They use the house for the residents, people probably up to manage the complex, and the barn is used for buses and things like that. And you know, so it's all well kept. But you know, the last surviving the homestead on the atrium. So the sea, well, they were gone by 1808. So who knows? So as you know, from these tracks, Brubakers are now really all over North America, including very up here. Somebody really caught me out. I was joking that Lancaster County is the only place where the name Brubaker is like Smith is in other English speaking country. And now I know there's another place. So, you know, it's fascinating. And so Brubaker, what I say is called the diaspora, it's all over the United States. The genealogy that we had done that was done in the 1950s really only lists families about the 5th generation. It gets somewhere around the turn, around 1900. Some go past that, some stop before it. So there's just been a continued, and that had people all over the Midwest. Now we know California, well, all over. We should do the next map I do should be a PID map of Brubakers around North America. So I've really enjoyed meeting you, meeting Canadians, and thanks very much.
Why don't you use the wireless one that seems to be doing better?
He's from Lancaster. You did a great job, Marty. He knows more than I did. By the way, that's the church. Bob. Didn't quite get it. Didn't quite time. Okay, yeah, I just double comments. I think one of the questions that I've raised, and I've heard others too, is the impression I have, our government for the most part were very impoverished, and yet they wanted to escape Switzerland because of the persecution and the way they were imprisoned. And I think that's true, but there are some that did have finances. I think our cousin Brubakers probably did from their work in the Platte area. They had fertile ground there, and it wasn't taken care of until you take ground that's lying dormant for what 4 or 5 years, if not more, and you go back there and start farming again and use good normal farming skills and caring for the land. You can't help but be productive. I suspect that with the Brubakers, maybe their Hershey's too, that they probably had funding to be able to purchase land. You might say, well, okay, why do we keep buying more land? Well, the other thing that's interesting is in agriculture, particularly in Lancaster County during this period of time, 1717 to 1740s, the average farmer was actually able to pay the farms off in 1 to 2 years. Now, there are farmers in here, you can pay it off in 1 to 2 years. Like teaching. I don't see farms going up. But I think what's happening is they were really hardworking. They cleared the land better than what was done before. And they basically were able to produce a lot of food. They also had a growing city, not just Lancaster, but Philadelphia. So many of them were like, we would all truck catching, like you would raise your produce and then sell them. And they were taking the horse and wagons back and forth to Philadelphia, which was about 60 miles. So that's a pretty big trip. Oh, I gotta tell you a story related to that. I live in Mount Joy, and I went to high school, Donegal. You say Donegal, it doesn't sound German. It's not. It's Celtic. It's Swiss Irish. And the Irish lived there before the Swiss Germans came. And but anyhow, the interesting story was that the land near us was owned by Cravens. It's a good Swiss German name, at least in our service. You have Cravens up here? I don't think I saw any Craven names. Or Gravel would be the same as Cravens. Oh, yeah, not a Gravel, sure. Yeah, so so the story is that I don't know if it's true, but it was in John Bruce's book, The Earth is the Lord's. Are you familiar with the book at all? The Earth is the Lord's. It's about 1,000-page book that John Lancaster, a lot of information. Being Dale got a lot of information. He probably got more from this. This is the Pennsylvania Mennonite Heritage. It was published in July 19. It's a very detailed history of the Brubakers. But anyway, the story goes this way: the Gravel farm was a very early farmer, hardworking, muscular. And he and his son were taking a wagon with their produce to Philadelphia. They were going part way down. There's this young teenager, thin, skinny guy on the other wagon was coming back to Philadelphia. And so they were on a trail that was very narrow. You could only have one horse and wagon trail at one time. There had to be a place where you pull off. And so they got to the point where neither of them were interested in getting out of the way. And so finally, supposedly, Mr. Crable said to this young fellow, you don't move over. I might have to do something I don't want to do. And this young guy moved over. One, and his son, I said, Daddy, what would you do if you said you want to go? He said, well, I could go over. Anyhow, I just wanted to share that. I mean, I think what I'm really interested in basically what has been mentioned is that we're very blessed with people that give us in many areas. Agriculture is not the only area. And a lot of Swiss travelers get into education, but a big piece of many of our daughters and sons and grandchildren. One of the things I've been impressed with that is in Ontario, it appears to be that the farmers are able to keep their young men and women interested in farming, and they keep buying farmland. And that's interesting that they have that educational experience. And it's not just in the education, it's the way they live their life. Obviously, it influences young children. So that's a blessing to see that. Do you have like land reserve in Ontario? I think you very much talk about that. No such thing. Well, that could be another form. Yeah, farmland. Okay, so you do have a land preservation. So I think what Marty, I think we're going to be open to sort of questions and answers. I mean, we can just open, well, you know, certainly Marty and I will, again, if you have questions having nothing to do with what we said. we might never get it. Well, both of us have a problem. We have an equation.
By the way, speaker. By the way, we have to be at least 10 generations apart. Yeah, he's a doctor, he can verify those are DNA. Kind of amazing. And it's California.
It's mentioned that some men have seen Ukraine.
Mark, please repeat the question back since it didn't carry.
Thank you. It was mentioned today that some of the Brubakers migrated eastward into the Ukraine, and I had understood that they were welcomed, they were invited by Catherine the Great, and I think she was married to the Tsar, wasn't she? She was the Tsar. Her husband was, he was deceased from. And that's how we went. The situation is similar to our Brubakers, among others, going from our Miami area in Waterman County north to Iowa, this light prairie grass, but they worked very hard and were able to make a good living there.
Yeah, Ukraine is one of the most productive areas.
That's what's in the news, yeah.
It's a little bit, it's not quite as productive as American Midwest. It's a little bit older, but not that much. It's a very productive area. And Catherine the Great was very interested in establishing settlements furthering the Russian Empire and doing it in a productive way, not just military, but she did do a lot of military stuff. I mean, she was so interested that one of her General Kenneth took her on tour of all the land he conquered in Moscow, the Volga, and going down the river. He had 20 villages put up all along the Volga, just front not behind. And see, look what I have done, look what I have done. It's just like, kind of funny. Like all of them had villages there.
Was it after she died that the following czars didn't tolerate this German-speaking Protestant non-military group, and they were either forced to help the military, or they were all removed by the 1920s. some of them came to my immediate area in Elmira, Ontario.
Well, there were problems, and I'm not an expert, as I recall. There were struggles, especially with, it's a problem, Mennonites and Quakers have had, and particularly they won't take allegiance, and you're not going to do military. That's a problem, even in Switzerland is a problem. That's why they were persecuted in Switzerland. There would have been, I think there would have been religious tolerance. It was the civil oaths that really got you. Now, Zwingli and some of them have been but on the part of the regular population, what got them was they wouldn't take enough to help out with defense and military. So, but to go into Russian thing, there were productive German communities in Russia right up until the mid-20s, before World War II. It just depended on how they played the game.
Yeah.
Because Germans were not as productive. They would, as long as they behaved themselves. And see, other people were putting themselves in the same situation. And when they came out of Switzerland and wound up in South, and they had all those conditions. You know, you couldn't walk outside, you couldn't meet more than 25 people, things like that. And so the other people wound up in that similar situation.
I can just add, the family branch I know in Germany. Not loud enough?
Thank you. It helps the audience online.
The ground up.
I just got add this family branch I know in Germany, who were Mennonites in the middle of the 18th century and emigrated to Galicia. And Galicia in that time belonged to the Austrian Empire. Today, Austria is that big on the map. In that time, it was much bigger. Hungary belonged to it, Northern Italy, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and so on. And Galicia, which is today in Ukraine, but it's not Russia. In that time, it was the Habsburger Kaiserreich, the Austrian Empire.
But there were Germans in
And there were Germans and there were Mennonites.
I know there were a lot of Germans.
There were Mennonites and the Mennonites still in Galicia, and they still are Mennonites today in Germany.
I might just, one of the topic that you mentioned, Marty, on the oath. That's something that's very interesting to me to learn. And that is, when our cousins were here for about 10 years. Here, I'm sorry. I mean, it's like, well, I feel like I'm in Mason County here too. So our cousins were concerned about they couldn't be citizens. And that actually, John Lane's Willie book, he had a copy of a petition about 150 Swiss Germans that signed this petition to the Assembly, which was the 100th Gospel, that the governing body for the Queen, the King. And so they tried to go to the Assembly and say, why can't we be citizens? Here 10 years ago, and we think that we should deserve citizenship. They weren't successful, so they did the Plan B, which I would be Plan A. I think they went to the Quakers. Now the Quakers were citizens, but they also did not bear arms. They were opposed to that. So how can it be that they were citizens and our cousins couldn't be citizens? So the Quakers were very effective in convincing the Assembly to look. These people, the Swiss Germans in this area, are marvelous farmers. They love and care for their neighbors who need. Their sons and daughters are in prison. They pay their taxes. So what is the issue? And finally, King George III said, well, if you pledge allegiance to our governing body, to the king, to the queen, and whatever, and if you keep your oath that that's what you want to do, we will do, then we'll give you citizenship. And so they became citizens in 1718. No, 1728. Yeah. So that's interesting. And the other piece that plays in it is into, they had a great time for about 50 years until the independence of the United States occurred in 1776. And that was another major issue, in fact, I have to know that I'd like to share with you, and it's on, actually, events in person. Now that's H-I-R-S-T-H-I. Have you ever seen that spelling? H-I-R-S-T-H-I. But that was original spelling person. They migrated over here and changed it to what we know now. H-I-R-S-T-H-I. But actually, I can tell you incidentally, that is a spelling for Jewish people with the name Hershey. And some of my friends told me more than once that when they went to another area like Chicago and they saw the name Hershey spelled the way Milton Hershey is, they invited them to specifically. That's another derivation like Brubacher-Brubaker. That means you're Hershey and you're Jewish. So I found that very interesting. But the point I want to make is, with the revolution coming along, that's a big issue. That's Hershey actually sent a letter which had I'm going to just quote a sentence and stated this: those whose conscience do not allow them to fight should contribute to the relief of the families of others who fight. And that is both for the Tories, the group that were faithful to their allegiance and their oath to the King of England, and then the Whigs would be the ones who were fighting against the Tories. So they're saying we will take care of the religions. That, of course, didn't fly. And that's when they had the conscription of the year or two later, actually, in 1777, they said, well, able then 18 years to 53 years of age. I thought that was interesting, 53 years of age. That was beyond life expectancy at that time. But they're going to catch you up with doing this. So at that time, there was a tax. If you know more about this, I do about the tax being administered. So like a tax, like I were scripted, and I said, I might get my conscience, I can do that. Then you had to pay a tax to finance the revolution after the US. But it was a really major thing. And that was the most one of the significant things that they said. They told the government Marty around here, we made an oath to the King of England. We said we would never break that. So oaths were very important to our heritage, making commitments.
Well, only that it might have encouraged some people to come up when the crown was offering good in Canada. That might have been a factor. You know, sympathies, things that happened at that time period, playing out over 2 decades later, many of the world well, some of the same issues. That was taking place as people were starting to migrate. Some before, some after. Some more questions?
You're closest.
You were saying those Mennonites that became citizens, like they swore you the oath in 1728 or whatever.
I don't know. I know when I have to testify in court, I always say that that was never an issue. But it's a good question. I'm not aware of evidence of the issue. Over here.
I think it was in Dale's presentation slide. There was a picture there that Mannheim Street. That was in Germany.
It's the street where the Mennonite churches.
When you drive it, it's
The street where the Mennonite churches. In Eberson.
Somewhere here. Yes.
Going back to the where the people came from Germany, when they landed there, and you were mentioning how they wanted to become citizens in at that time it was the province of Pennsylvania, and then the act of naturalization was enacted. And then there's a whole lot of records that you can find of all the people when they were naturalized as citizens then. And so not all the people were naturalized at the same time. I use that records quite extensively myself to figure out when different people were naturalized and entered into citizens of the province of Pennsylvania at that time, because they were German citizens province, and the province of Pennsylvania was an English territory. So that's-
I didn't mean to apply the blanket act. The legislation enables individuals to come in. The Brubaker could quickly then become national. Can you hear me back there? No. Okay. Then the question was, or the observation was, is that people weren't automatically natural for someone. And that's going to be complied with. The legislation in 1720s enabled individuals to apply for naturalization. It wasn't an automatic, blanket application to all German and Swiss German people when they come over. And so you have to do it individually.
And another aspect to that, I believe, was the original people coming over, they were able to get their properties and so long as they did their proper, so many buildings, there's so much land, they got the rights to the properties. But unless they were naturalized, they were not able to sell these properties later on. And so they pushed them to become naturalized so they could legally sell their properties to the next generation.
We did have a online comment, this from Doug Brubaker. Many of you know and helped arrange much of what we're seeing today. Well, two things. One, he pointed out that on Zoom, there are people here from British Columbia, Georgia, Maryland, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Ontario, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, and also Germany present here and Switzerland online. Was looking for the rest of where everyone is from. Some of the other comments are pointing out which line they're from. But Doug actually made the question when you were pointing out the farms and the as the lines there in Lancaster County, that there is one oasis of a farm left to the what would be the lower left of your B family tag. Maybe you could just use the physical map on the right here next to Ken. He's got a link to it about cousins of the Brubaker family still own it to this day. Let me see if this one here. What's on the site? Yes, it is owned by the brothers Robert and Marlon Miller. Or sorry, I bisects the farm that is owned by them. Yes. Okay.
Probably will be eaten up sometime soon, but probably not farms activity. So let's hope not. And I don't think it's in the. If it's the land reserve. But you have to get down to get it out of the reserve. That's.
Yeah, the Miller Brubaker farm, Doug said, but yes, so, that was Doug's comment. Other comments in the room? Questions?
Could you just sort of please clarify, you talked a lot about the A, B, C, D lines, but I'm not familiar with who they are, like who is that? John W versus John E versus John S. Which one is which line?
I don't remember which one W and S are in. One
Speaking.
one.
Speaking to the mic.
One out of the A line and one is out of the D line. The D line came over in 1748 when the son of A went back to Europe to get a wife. And Abraham Brubacher came back with his family to Lancaster County with Hans, with John, the son of A1, and took land in Lancaster County. From this, his children started to spread out into other parts of Pennsylvania and eventually to Canada. I have a genealogy or something.
You know how that relates to the 4 John Brubakers that settled up in this area?
Yeah, they were the ancestors of the John W. and John S.
Right, so they were all A,
No, one was A and one was B and.
so which one was B? That's what
Okay, well, I'll have to look it up. I'm not used to John W. and John S.
I don't know, but there might be someone here that knows already. You can look it up. Maybe over here.
No, sure. No, I know. John W, John X, Brubacher, John, and John S. Brubaker, Swamp John, Everett, E. John E. Brubaker, and Kitchener. I'm not sure which letter he had, it was different.
sorry, did you say D?
D, with a D.
Thank you.
John, just John Brubaker married Kenneth. John Brubaker married Catherine Shirk. Shirk is a name I think you recognize. John S. 1822 to 1902. He had the house that's now the Brubaker Museum. Is that the one? No, there's another John. But that's one of the lines here.
We'll be covering the different age, the different lines tonight.
Yeah, that'll be discussed this evening. Yeah. Yeah. One of Waterloo's discussing with you. Right? We can find it for you. Let's let the page.
Any other questions? Dan? You done?
Okay, there is a site here that Doug is pointing us to. I don't know how to, what's this?
He's gonna be doing training tonight.
Yeah, that's coming. Okay.
You're absolutely correct. You've exhausted our knowledge.
I'm going to be talking about another topic, and I now know that Dave is going to speak about nice methods. So how you get from Lancaster County to Ontario? Stay tuned, and you'll hear about tonight.
Okay, Mitch, did you have any more online? Is that it?
No, this is Doug pointed online to the history of the lines on the Brubaker family site. I can leave this up, and during the break, if people want to copy down the link, you have to get a little closer to see it.
Okay,
you're welcome to do that.
So just leave it on the screen.
Yep.
Okay, let's give another round of applause for Ken and Marty. Okay. We actually have extra time. We were actually thinking we were going to be running a little bit tight, but we have plenty of time because dinner is not starting until 5:30. So right now we're at the end of our